Have you ever imagined what kind of bond could form between a lonely woman and four wild bears on a stormy, snow-covered night? It was a night soaked in darkness and howling winds. Snow lashed the trees, and the forest felt like an endless maze of cold and fear. Amelia, her breath shaky and hands trembling, fought her way through the frozen silence. Her body ached, each step heavier than the last as pain surged through her. She was pregnant, alone, and lost. Then a sound. Not the wind, not the crunch of snow beneath her feet. Growls, deep low and surrounding her. She turned slowly, heart pounding. Four enormous bears stood still among the trees. Their eyes glowed faintly through the snowstorm, fixed on her, not with rage, but with something she couldn't explain. They didn't attack. They didn't run. They stayed. And one by one, they began to move, not to scare her, but to shield her. No one could have imagined what came next. No one could believe how these wild beasts would change her fate forever. Nestled at the edge of the Swiss forest stood a small wooden cabin. Modest, but warm, its walls held stories of laughter, longing, and healing. Inside, Amelia carefully folded tiny clothes into a drawer. Each piece felt like a promise. She placed her hand gently on her belly, whispering soft hopes to the little life growing within her. But beneath her calm exterior lived a silent fear. This wasn't the first time she had felt these flutters. Twice before, life had begun and ended too soon. The ache of those losses still sat in the corners of their home, invisible but ever present. Thomas stepped in, wiping snow off his jacket. His uniform bore the weight of his duty. He was an army rescuer, always ready to brave storms, climb peaks, and find the lost. But nothing had ever made him feel as helpless as watching Amelia go through those earlier heartbreaks. He walked over, kneeling beside her. "You feeling all right?" he asked softly, looking in her tired but determined eyes. Amelia smiled, small and sure. Better than ever. Just then, the radio on his belt crackled to life. A voice, urgent and sharp. "Unit 3, we've got a missing hiker caught in the northern ridge. Snow's coming in hard. Immediate assistance needed." Thomas closed his eyes for a beat. Of all nights, he looked at her again, searching her face for permission he didn't want to ask for. Amelia took his hand. "I'm okay, Thomas," she said gently, her fingers tightening around his. "You go. Save lives. That's what you do." But she interrupted, firm yet loving. "Main thick hoon, Thomas. Tum Jao. Lagon ki jambakeo." There was hesitation in his eyes, the kind only someone in love understands. But duty called louder. He kissed her forehead, held her for a moment longer, and then left. The door shut with a soft thud, but the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. Outside, the sky began to shift. The wind picked up speed. Inside, Amelia sat by the window, watching the first flakes of snow fall. Quiet, fragile, beautiful. She had faced loss. She had tasted pain, but she had also grown stronger. And she believed this time would be different. She just didn't know what the night held, or how close danger, and something entirely unexpected, was creeping toward her. The wind howled louder than it had all season, slamming against the windows of the small cabin. Snow began to fall, not the gentle kind, but heavy, sideways sheets that blurred the trees into white ghosts. Inside, Amelia wrapped a blanket around herself, trying to steady her breathing. She walked to the kitchen and reached for her phone. No signal. She opened the old radio on the shelf, turned the dial. Only static. She glanced toward the distant cell tower visible from her kitchen window, but it was gone in the thick veil of snow. Then the lights flickered and died. Complete silence. Complete darkness. And then, the first sharp twist in her lower belly. It passed quickly, but she knew what it was. She had read enough, felt enough to recognize it. A contraction. Her hand instinctively reached for her belly. "Not now, baby, please. Just a little longer," she whispered to herself, trying to smile through it. She lit a candle and sat down, trying to stay calm. But then another wave came, sharper, longer. She couldn't wait for Thomas. She couldn't wait for morning. She had to reach the nearest help, Clara, the retired medical assistant, lived just 4 miles away. Amelia grabbed her coat, packed a few essentials, and climbed into their old Jeep. She turned the key. It sputtered, then roared to life. Hope surged in her chest, until half a mile down the path, the vehicle hiccuped, slowed, and stopped. Fuel. Gone. She hit the steering wheel, eyes filling with frustrated tears. She had no choice. Pulling her scarf tighter around her face, she stepped into the blizzard. The snow came up to her knees. Every step was a battle. Her contractions now pulsed with urgency, hitting every 10 minutes, then 8. She tried to stay on the trail, but soon, all paths vanished into a single, blinding sheet of white. Trees surrounded her like unfamiliar strangers. Her limbs stiffened. She couldn't feel her fingers. Still she walked, until her legs buckled. She fell to her knees, panting, a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp escaping her lips. She pressed a hand to her belly, fear creeping in. She was lost. She spotted a dip in the snowy slope ahead, low rocks and broken branches. Crawling closer, she realized it was a small, cave-like hollow, barely deep enough to shield her from a storm. But it was enough. Dragging herself inside, she collapsed against the cold stone wall. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her father's old lighter. The tiny flame sputtered, then held. She found some dry leaves, moss, and old bark nearby. After a few tries, a small fire was born. Warmth, just a flicker, but it was something. Another contraction hit. Longer, crueler. She bit her scarf to keep from screaming. Alone, cold, in labor. She looked around. No one, nothing but wind and snow and stone. And yet, her heart didn't break. Instead, it remembered. Thomas had taught her survival, how to breathe through fear, how to trust her body. Her fingers tightened into fists. Thomas trained me for this. I will do this. For my baby. She lay back against her bag, breathing through the pain. Every few minutes, another wave crashed through her body. She was shaking, sweating despite the cold. The fire crackled softly, like a heartbeat in the silence. Then, a sound, crunching snow outside the cave. Low, deliberate, not wind, not storm. She held her breath. Something was coming. The fire flickered weakly now. Amelia's body trembled with exhaustion and pain, her contractions coming closer together, each one stealing her breath, forcing her deeper into survival mode. Her eyes fluttered open and closed in a daze, her breath shallow. Then, a low grunt. At first, she thought it was another wave of pain, a sound made by her own mind. But then she heard again, closer, deeper, followed by the unmistakable sound of snow crunching under heavy weight. She turned toward the cave's entrance and froze, for shadows moved through the blizzard. Massive forms, slow, heavy, deliberate. Bears. They stepped into view one by one. 2 were large, easily towering in the dim light. A third was slightly smaller, younger. And the fourth, a powerful, poised female, her eyes steady, intelligent. She stood ahead of the others like a quiet guardian. Amelia's heart pounded in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't run. She was trapped, alone, and now, face to face with 4 wild predators. But then, they didn't attack. They didn't roar. They settled. The largest bear sat at the mouth of the cave, turning its back to the storm. The others followed suit, slowly forming a loose, silent circle around her. The female bear stepped in last and sat nearest to Amelia, watching her intently, but with no malice. Only calm. Their deep breaths filled the cave, loud but rhythmic. Their eyes shimmered in the faint firelight, not with hunger, but something closer to understanding. Amelia stared at them, tears brimming in her eyes. Her fear didn't vanish in an instant, but it softened. Something ancient, something maternal in her recognized something kind in theirs. She leaned back and closed her eyes, whispering under her breath, "Why are you here?" But she didn't need an answer. Not now. Hours passed. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cave, time had slowed to the pace of her breathing. Contractions came harder, faster. Each one sent waves of agony through her body, but she held on. The warmth from the bears' bodies spread through the air. One bear shifted closer, offering its side as a shield against the cold. The female, calm and composed, sat near Amelia's head, watching her with quiet intensity. At one point, Amelia whimpered, her hands slipping from her bag of supplies. The female bear gently nudged her hand with her snout. A soft touch, reassuring. Another bear shuffled to the far end of the cave, returned with dry twigs in its mouth, and dropped them near the fading fire. The flames rose again, small but bright. Amelia could barely comprehend what was happening. She was in labor and being protected, comforted by wild creatures. And then a tremor passed through the cave floor. Crack! The fire's heat had weakened the frozen earth above. A chunk of the ceiling crumbled, falling inches from where Amelia lay. The bears reacted instantly. The female bear let out a deep, urgent grunt and moved swiftly to Amelia's side. The younger bear nudged her gently with its head. The two larger ones moved to the weakened wall. Another crack, louder. The ceiling was collapsing. In a blur of motion, the four bears pushed against her with their weight, carefully, steadily, until Amelia was out of the cave. She stumbled into the snow, dazed, dizzy, but safe. Behind her, the cave collapsed with a thunderous crash. But the bears, all four, had made it out too. They surrounded her again, forming a protective circle in the snow as she fell to her knees, gasping for air. Her body seized in one final contraction. And then, a cry, a soft, pure cry, a child's cry. There, beneath a snow-laden tree, Amelia gave birth to a baby girl. Her hands trembling, she wrapped the infant in her coat and held her close. The female bear stepped closer, sitting quietly just a few feet away, watchful, gentle. Amelia sobbed, overcome. The tears came freely now, of pain, of relief, of wonder. "You," she whispered through her tears, looking at them. "You saved us. You saved us." The baby stirred in her arms. She looked down at her daughter. A name rose to her lips like it had always been there. Luna. Under the dim, silvery sky, surrounded by ancient guardians of the forest, Luna took her first breath. And in that sacred moment, man and beast shared something timeless. Not fear, not dominance, but protection, instinct, and love. Morning light stretched across the snowy clearing like a quiet prayer. The storm had passed, and the forest held its breath in a hush of silver mist and fragile peace. Thomas drove through the last bend in the forest trail, his heart pounding louder with each passing second. His eyes scanned the endless white until he saw them. At the center of the clearing, near a snow-covered tree, sat Amelia, wrapped in blankets, a baby in her arms. And around her, the impossible. 4 bears. Thomas slammed the brakes and jumped out, stumbling through the snow. "Amelia!" he shouted, voice cracking with fear, confusion, hope. The bears stirred, but didn't attack. They simply turned their heads, slow and calm, as if they knew. Amelia looked up, tired but glowing. She raised a hand. "It's okay, Thomas," she whispered as he reached her, breathless. "They saved us." He dropped to his knees beside her, staring at the tiny face nestled against her chest. Luna, his daughter. Then his gaze met the eyes of the female bear. For a long moment, man and beast just looked at one another. And in that silent exchange, no words were needed. Only gratitude. Thomas nodded one slow, "Thank you." 1 year later, spring had returned to the valley. The snow had melted into bright green fields, the trees humming with birdsong. A wooden home stood where the old cabin once did, bigger, warmer, filled with new life. Amelia sat on the porch, a cup of tea in her hand, watching Luna take wobbly steps through the grass, chasing butterflies with a soft giggle. And not far from her, like quiet, living statues, sat the bears. The same 4. They had stayed, injured during the collapse. They had never returned fully to the wild. Instead, they remained nearby, gentle protectors, living in the woods just behind the family home. They came and went, but always returned, always watched over Luna. One of them nudged a ball back to the toddler with a flick of its nose. Another lay under the sun, eyes half closed, listening for trouble that never came. Amelia smiled, heart full. She turned to a small photo album beside her, pictures of that night, the journey after the new life. She thought back to that moment in the cave. That night, she whispered to herself, we were strangers, but we understood each other without words. And that understanding had become something bigger. Family. It didn't take long for the world to hear the story. What started as whispers in a mountain village became a global tale of wonder. Journalists, scientists, even wildlife experts came to witness what they thought was impossible, a human family coexisting with wild bears. But Amelia never called them wild again. To her, they were guardians, survivors, souls who had felt her pain, her fear, and offered shelter instead of harm. Visitors came and left, some in awe, some in disbelief. But all left changed, inspired, and even as the world watched, life here remained simple. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, the four bears sat quietly by the edge of the woods. A distant growl echoed from deep in the trees, a call from the wild. One of the bears lifted its head and growled back. A conversation only they understood. Amelia stood in the doorway, watching. She knew what it meant. Their hearts belonged here, but the forest still called to them. Still, she smiled, because whether near or far, they would always be Luna's silent protectors. She walked over, gently placing her hand on the female bear's back. The bear didn't flinch, just leaned in, as if remembering the cave, the fire, the storm. Thank you, Amelia whispered once more. And as the stars began to fill the sky, Luna laughed. Running through the yard, all four bears behind her, like the soft footfalls of fate itself. This wasn't just the story of a woman and four bears. This was the story of trust, instinct, and love, hidden deep within us all. It was about understanding beyond language, about survival, not just of the body, but of the soul. So if this story touched your heart, let it travel. Let it reach the ones who believe in kindness from unexpected places. Share it with those who still believe in quiet miracles. Because sometimes the wildest stories are the ones most deeply human. Luna throws her head back in a giggle as a bear rolls beside her. Amelia watches, placing a loving hand on the female bear's fur, both smiling, creature and mother, as if they've always belonged together.